Hello and welcome to the Believe Show. I'm thrilled that today we have Ben Lamorte with us. Hello, Ben.
Hello, Senia. I'm also glad to be here.
So let me tell you a little bit about Ben, and then we're going to ask him the fun questions at the beginning and get right into it. What happened with Ben is a friend of mine, a friend from undergrad, said, you have to meet Ben, and he knows all about our OKRs. He knows everything about OKRs. If you've ever wanted to know anything about it, he's the person. So I met Ben, I talked with him. He was really fun to talk with, and I read his book. And he is awesome on OKRs. But the cool thing is you've all heard about OKRs, objectives and key results. You've heard Google does this, big companies does this, but Ben really knows how and why people do it. So let me show you a little bit about Ben. This is Ben's website, which is so simple. It's literally OKRs.com. That's Ben's website. And this is the book that I read by Ben. He's got another one coming out that he'll tell us about, but this one's super, really clear how to go through, how to implement OKRs in your business, even if you're an executive coaching business like I am. So have really enjoyed it and am very glad that Ben is here with us today. Hi, Ben.
Hello, hello. Thanks for the quick intro. That was great.
Ben, let's start with the silly questions.
Sure.
What did you want to be when you were growing up?
Well, like many American boys growing up, I wanted to be, a baseball player. And in fact, I was thinking about being a pitcher. And I pretty much, that was it. It held me all the way through until high school. And I realized I was going to maybe go for soccer player. That was my backup.
So that's a lot of commitment, a lot of hours to practicing.
A lot of sports. That's why I'm wearing my sports outfit right here. I was really into sports. I gave up on those dreams, though. I got to admit, Senia.
Hey, I don't know. There's always a secondary career. You never know.
That's true. Well, I do coach fourth grade girls soccer. And I mean, the money's not that good, but I will tell you, at least at the rec level, not the select level, but from a rec perspective, I'm really, really good at coaching fourth grade girls soccer. I mean, we put on rock music and we're dancing, and all the other girls are like, "Hey, I want to be on that guy's team. Well, their team's having more fun." So anyway,
that's awesome. Cool. Okay, second question. What is one of your favorite foods?
This is going to be strange, but I love, believe it or not, seaweed. I've been going through a real seaweed phase where if I'm hiking now, I just bring a little pack of seaweed and just something salty, something fun. And I think it's low-cal. I don't know, but I love it.
We're big fans. We're huge. We buy, I don't even know what you call them, but sheets of them from Costco. We're huge.
Right. Oh, yeah. That's right.
That's awesome. And the last question. High school can be a challenging time. What was a good part of high school for you?
Believe it or not, I was in the singing group called What Now? We started let's say an a cappella group. And it was so much fun. We weren't really that great, but we were good enough to where we could sing in harmony. We would go around and sing at the Christmas time and have our candles. And, we would start singing, Silent Night or whatever. It was just really good. We had this one lead singer that was really good. So people were just blown away. And it was so much fun to do that. And I missed that, actually.
That's so cool. That sounds so great. Okay, we're starting with the Believe segment, but actually with you, differently from other guests, could you please start by telling us what are these magical, mystical things called OKRs?
Sure, yeah. OKR stands for Objectives and Key Results. In its simplest form, it's really just a goal-setting model, okay? It goes back to the days of MBOs, management by objectives, and Andy Grove at Intel did not totally embrace the MBOs model, although actually he called it MBOs, even though he invented OKRs, when he separated out the objectives into quantitative statements. So he noticed that some of the MBOs were things like answer the phone better, be nicer on the phone. Others were reduce the amount of time on hold from 40 seconds to 20 seconds or something like that were more measurable. And as a mathematician, this drove him crazy because he wanted to know, is it a measurable thing or not? So he separated out the idea of an objective, which was a qualitative statement of doing better on the phone or whatever. And then the key results were the how do we know we've achieved the objective, which are measurable statements. And he also separated it out so that the OKRs really were not used in order to evaluate performance of employees. And this was a big change in the model of goal setting because typically goals, as you know, you're going to get reviewed on those goals. So what are you going to do? You're going to set the bar really low and make sure you hit those goals so that, you're safe. And that's just human behavior. And so Andy Grove wanted to make it be more stretch, and he wanted to make these goals visible throughout the whole organization. And of course, if your goals are tied to your bonus and it's kind of between you and your manager, you're not going to put those goals out there and make them visible. And then this creates silos. So the OKRs model really is created to increase more transparency and clarity about what we're trying to achieve and how we will know that we've achieved it.
Thank you so much for that overview, because you're sort of telling the history of OKRs at the same time that you're telling why they're useful.
Yeah, I think it's useful to know the history. And then now what happened was, as you mentioned earlier, I mean, Google started using OKRs in the 1990s when they had like 30, 40 people. And they continue to use OKRs to this day. It's really part of their culture. But because of the influence of Google primarily over the last, 25 years or so, OKRs started popping up and spreading out throughout organizations, really all around the world. And it was in 2018 that John Doerr wrote the book Measure What Matters. And when that book came out, this was like a bestseller. This is very different than my book that I wrote with my buddy Paul, where you could order online. If if Senia tells you to read it, maybe you'll read it. So
Read
John,
it. Read it.
yeah,
It's a great book. Read it. Here it is again. Read
there
it.
it is.
Read
Yeah.
it.
Well, for every one copy of my book that's sold, there's probably like 1,000 copies of John Doerr's book that's been sold. He's a famous Silicon Valley investor. He invested in Google at $12 million in the early stage. So don't worry, he's doing fine. But I'll tell you, that generated an incredible, almost like an over exuberance in OKRs. So now we started getting calls from everybody saying, hey, we want to do OKRs. We want to do OKRs. And we really had to slow them down and say, why do you want to do OKRs? Oh, because I read the book, Measure What Matters by John Doerr. Time out. Let's really look at why do you want to do OKRs, and what are you looking to benefit from the framework? And that's the history and the sort of the buzz that's creating. And we're sort of feeding off that right now, which leads me to write my next book called the OKRs Field Book, which is really going to be the first book for OKRs coaches, okay? Because the other books that are out there, including mine, are really more introduction to OKRs and sort of why you should do OKRs and who's doing OKRs and what's an example of an OKR. But after reading these books, you're left with this, wait a minute, now how do we actually do this?
Yeah.
And that's where the second book comes in.
So before we talk about the topic that you brought to us, which is pre-scoring, can you give me an example of someone you've worked with? So someone who, even what would be helpful, I think, for our viewers, someone who didn't know very much about OKRs, and they came to you and they said, Ben, help us out. What are the ways that you worked with them? What results did they have? How did they implement it?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to go back to one of my really early clients that did not know much about OKR. So this was well before Measure What Matters. This was probably 2015 or so, early days. And it was, believe it or not, a company that sells like online Pokemon cards and things like that. Okay. So they were one of the leaders in the space of putting on collectible cards, not sports cards, but cards actually that I don't know anything about. So Pokemon is the best I can do, but there were others like that. And they created a place for the different stores to sell their cards online. So it's kind of like the Amazon of like Pokemon cards or something. Well, as it turns out, they were doing pretty well, but they approached me saying, look, Ben, we need your help because we want to get focused. We have too many things going on and we want to scale. And they started telling me all these things they wanted to do. And this is what I call the blah, blah, blah problem. Like, we want to do OKRs because, and then just 1,000 different reasons why we want to do OKRs. So as a coach, I just say, well, listen, why do you really want to do this? And they said, well, we need to be aligned and focused because we have a big event coming up called the Gamma Gaming Show or something like that. And it's this one annual conference and it's a big deal. I said, okay, well, let's use OKRs for that. And I'll never forget their reaction. They were like, you mean you can do that? And I was sort of like, well, okay. So OKRs is really a goal setting framework. And if that's your goal, then yeah, that's what we want to do. So I said, what is the objective? And he said, well, we want to make this big Gamma show a success. Really, what does that really look like? And we tried to make it really excited. We want to make a big splash at the Gamma event. And the CEO, I'll never forget, he said, that's what we really want to do. Well, when is that event? Oh, it's on this date. Okay. So how do we know we've made a big splash at the Gamma event? And then we went through all the different conversations and we ended up with an OKR. And it was a magical conversation because it helped the CEO then articulate to the entire company, which is like 50 people, a small company, but to say, listen, here's how we know that Gamma is a success. And once this happened, and there were these measurable statements, there were things like 30 people will have registered for our beta, solution at the trade show by the end of the trade show. Oh, well, wait a minute. Then the people that are working there are thinking like, well, wait a minute, what features do we need for that? Or wait a minute, what if we could launch that a month before the trade show? What if we could get people to register for it before the trade show? What if we did a webinar saying to the people that sign up for the trade show that we're going to, so all of a sudden they were having this really good focused conversation about how to drive the OKR. And that one session really led to a lot of the value. We then continued to use OKRs and my coaching was like very intermittent. But it was amazing, the outcome of it. They only had one OKR. So they had one objective with about 3 or 4 different ways of measuring the achievement of that objective. But then that was it. And when he presented the OKRs to me, he was thinking like everybody in the company, like every individual person would have their own individual OKR. And the lesson learned in that case was actually, let's just have the one big OKR and make it measurable, and everybody should be driving toward it. Now, maybe some people aren't driving toward as much as others, and there's some issues there, but the bottom line is that was a success. And as far as I know, they're still using OKRs to this day, but they're using it at a very high level to just talk about what are we really trying to achieve as an organization.
Big goals. Thank you so much for that example. That makes it so clear that here's somebody who says, I like the idea of OKRs. Let's have my X people in my organization each have a different one. And you come in and you say, well, what is the goal? And now all of them are moving towards the same goal.
Yeah, and I asked them questions like, well, wait a minute, are we trying to like hold people accountable for their individual commitments? And the CEO was like, well, no, that's not really what we want to do. Well, then I was very quickly able to say, well, then in that case, let's not have every individual person write down their OKRs. And he said, well, that sounds great. I thought that because I'd watched the video with Google explaining OKRs, I thought individual people had to write down their OKRs. And I had to explain, well, no, that's just how Google does it. And how even the fact of the matter is, even my friends who work at Google would say, we don't recommend you do it the way we do it. We're Google. And actually, Google says that about everything they do, because, it used to be Harvard Business Review wrote an article and everybody's like, oh my God, did you see what Harvard Business Review wrote? Now I don't even know if anybody even knows about Harvard Business Review. I think I'm the only subscriber left.
I read it.
Oh, you read it? Okay, you and me, we're the two people. Okay, HBR, if you're listening, you should, promote that.
No, I like HBR.
I like it too. But the thing is, like, if somebody at Google, sneezes, it's like front page of the Wall Street Journal, and everybody's like, oh my God, we should all start sneezing because Google's doing it. So you have to rein in the enthusiasm when people are doing it.
Let's switch gears to specifically about you and OKRs.
Sure.
What is it that you believe that others in your field may not agree with you about?
Yeah. So, look, we all agree to some extent that key results themselves should be aspirational, meaning that when you write down the key result, you shouldn't just simply write down, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to publish the blog and we're going to update the sales deck for our PowerPoint slides. Okay, that's not really a good key result, because that's just stuff we're going to do and we know we can do it. So it's more of a commitment and it's more of an action item. So I think everybody agrees on that. Where you get into a little bit of controversy is, how stretched do we make the key result? So for example, in Measure What Matters, what John Doerr advocates is to write down two types of key results. He wants you to write down an aspirational key result, which is like a real push, stretch kind of a thought. But he also wants you to write a different type of key result called the commit level key result. And what happens in practice is you just write commit level key results. This is just the human nature of it. And people are kind of covering their work and saying, see, these are all the things I'm going to do. And so I'm going to write them down as my commitments. I'm going to make a to-do list, if you will. And to some extent, John Doerr himself is guilty of this. And even in his book, I don't know, I haven't talked to John about this. So if you're watching, John, pretty unlikely, but if you are, we should talk offline. But I'll tell you, most of my colleagues are not impressed, because some of the key results in the book are things like produce a demo. Well, produce a demo, I don't even know what that means, first of all. A demo of what? How do I know the demo is produced? What is the outcome of the demo, right? So what I do in my next book, this field book that I'm working on, is I do a mock interview with John Doerr. And I say, John, let's try to come up with that same key result of produce a demo. Let's try to stretch our thinking and say, what is the outcome that would be truly amazing? Let's agree on that. This is a very basic concept, if you will, going back to Covey, begin with the end in mind, right? Like if your ladder is going up the wall, ultimately, where are you really trying to get? So I try to start with that. That's very uncomfortable for most people, because they want to start with, well, what is it that I know I can do? So what I found was that you have to find a balance. So rather than writing some key results as a commit and then other key results as aspirational, I simply write all key results as both. So every key result is written as aspirational, but I also walk you down to say, but what is the committed level of progress? So that what is the level of progress that we know we can achieve? And if we don't achieve this, then we say, wow, something must have gone wrong. And the reason why I love it is it forces you to have the conversation, right? It asks you it lets me as a coach ask a bunch of questions to always be stretching your thinking, but also balance that with always, but what do we know we can achieve? And this is critical to alignment, right? Because then the organization can talk about, well, wait a minute, we can manage expectations. Wouldn't that be amazing? Yeah, that's true. We're going to throw it out there. But what is it that we know we can achieve? And then I go a step further and I say, let's find a target level somewhere in between. Now, most people will say, Ben, that sounds really confusing.
So I have a question about the distinction. You've just told me that John Doerr says make an aspirational and a commit OKR. And you're telling me what you do is you make an aspirational one that you can commit to. Is that the distinction?
No. Here's what you have to think about. An objective like, let's say, improve sales. okay, for John Doerr might have the following 3 key results. Commit, update the sales deck. Commit, hire a new salesperson. Commit, present the demo. That's it. There's nothing aspirational at all. Sorry. All he did was write down 3 commits. There is no aspirational key result.
I thought he wanted you to do both.
Yes.
Okay.
Listen very carefully. I'm glad you brought that up. He does, but he distinguishes the key result. So there are 2 types of key results. On the one hand, you have your commit key result. And on the other hand, you have your aspirational key result, but they're totally different. They're not related. Okay. Those are different. So what happens in practice is John will say, hey, you should have a balance. You should have some commits and some aspirational. But in practice, people go like, yeah, that's interesting. I'm going to write down all my commits. Done. Nothing's aspirational and I'm doing measure what matters. I'm doing the John Doerr model.
You're saying people go to safety. I want to make sure that they actually get them done. I'm going to write down the ones I can.
That's it. They write down all their commits. And then every now and then, because like you said, they're like, oh, wait a minute, you're supposed to have aspirational also. Then what they do is they kind of go like, oh, by the way, let's throw in something at the bottom that looks aspirational. So it looks like we did our OKRs. That's what really happens.
Okay.
The distinction is what I'm trying to say, is actually I write down every key result as aspirational. There's only one type of key result in my model, and it's called aspirational key result. That's it. So every key result is aspirational. And then what I do, the problem with this model is if you only wrote aspirational, it would basically be like, well, this is pie in the sky stuff. We're not really committing to anything. So what I do is for the same key result that's aspirational, imagine you double click on it. Maybe that's the part that'll clarify this. I'm going to double click on that aspirational key result, which is now, let's say get 100 new customers or something like that. That's truly aspirational, probably not going to happen. And if I double click on it, I might say, well, what's the commit? The commit is I'm going to present the solution, the demo, if you will, to 100 customers. I'm committed, or prospects. So I'm committed to having meetings and presenting this to 100 prospects. That's what I know I can do. And if I don't do that, I failed. But that's still part of that same key result, which is to get 100 customers, which is aspirational. And I only see that commit when I double click on it and I see that commit. That's the model I'm trying to explain.
I think I see what you're saying. So it's almost like in John Doerr's model, there are 2 lists. Here's your commit list and your aspirational list. And you're saying in the Ben Lamorte model, there's one list, which is the aspirational list, but within each of the key results and aspiration, have the really, really specific committable.
Yes. And then within that, just to give you a little bit of extra complexity, there's a target. Let me give you a couple stories. I think this will help make sense of the whole thing. So when I was helping Sears, remember Sears? Okay. Yeah, this was a company, believe it or not, in my lifetime. And they were on their way down at the time. This was about 10 years ago. And they needed my help with OKRs. Well, one of the key results set, and I'm going to use fictitious numbers, but again, I don't think anybody from Sears really cares. It's public information. Sears was not doing so well. So one of the key results was like reduce expenses by $25 million for this department. And it was just written like that. It was just key result, reduce expenses by $25 million. And that was it. And it was set by the leader. And I remember talking to some of the people on the team and they said, that's just so ridiculous. There's no way we can reduce there's no way we can reduce the expenses by $25 million. But note, in this particular case at Sears, the key result was not written as aspirational. It was not written as commit. It was not written as target. It was simply key result.
Yeah.
Reduce this, right? So there was no scoring system. It just was, it's a key result. And so how do we talk about it? Well, I went back to the leader and I said, hey, leader, do you know that your team thinks it's absolutely ridiculous that you put reduce expenses by $25 million there and they think it's not going to happen? It's totally impossible. And the leader said, yeah, I know that, but I already read about key results and you're supposed to write these like total aspirational things that probably won't happen anyway. So I went with 25 million. So I said, okay, time out. You are now going to use the Ben Lamorte OKR scoring model, and I'm going to help you make this key result be more manageable. So I said, what is the amount of reduction that we know we can commit to, that we know we're going to hit by the end of this quarter? And he said, oh, that would be 18 million. I said, wow, okay, wow, that's pretty good. I was thinking he was going to say like 5 million. I had no idea what he would say. But I said, well, how do we know you can commit to 18 million? He said, that's already locked and loaded. That's already like, if we don't hit 18 million in reduction, something went wrong. I mean, I've already committed to that with the budget. We know that that's going to happen. We have a plan for that. I said, okay. Well, and what's the absolute maximum? I guess 25 million, right? He said, yeah, that would be like theoretically possible, but that's the absolute maximum. What's the target level at which you would be very happy? Like you have about a 50-50 shot of getting this level of reduction. He said about, I'd say 20 million. So all of a sudden we had a key result. The key result was reduce expenses by 25 million, commit 18 million, target 20 million. And then when I went back to the team and we explained this, everybody's like, oh, I get it now. And so what happened was, by just giving a point estimate, what I found in the real world in practice was that for every person that was like this leader at Sears who had written a single key result, happened to be aspirational, there was like an equal and opposite person who had written down 18 million saying, well, here's what we've committed to in the budget. So what was the correct answer? Is it 25 million or 18 million? And what I found was you have to put the full story for the given key result. Show me the commit, show me the aspirational, and show me the target. And the fine print is, this was the number one most valuable piece of feedback. Sears had been using OKRs for several years already. They came back to me and they said, the number one thing that you did that was helpful was that you helped us come up with a normalized scoring system where every key result was aspirational. We had a commit. People were talking in the hallway. Oh, really? Is that your commit or is that your target? Is that your stretch? What's the stretch? Is that really a stretch? That seems more like it should be a target. Or wait a minute, you're saying that's the commit? There's no way we can commit to that. That should be more like the target. The commit should be this. All of a sudden, the discussions were so much more engaging and aligning around what is going to really happen versus what's going to be amazing. And that gave them a common way of talking about how to write down the key results in the first place so that they could avoid those conversations like, I don't know what that guy's thinking. There's no way we're going to get 25 million. Where, it should have been this.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a jumping off point for discussions and debate and kind of granular figuring out of what actually gets us there. What did they hit in these theoretical numbers?
I think that they ended up hitting something between like around 18 and 20. It was in that lower end, but they did at least hit the commit. I think they might have gotten close to the target. But the idea was there were some interesting analyses of, okay, should we write the key result as the stretch and then you double click and then you see the commit and the target? Or should we write the key result as the target, which is that 50-50 shot, kind of difficult, but attainable. And then you sort of see here's the delta, like here's the upside, here's the downside, or here's what we know we can hit versus here's the stretch. A lot of big companies now do the target, okay? Because if you could only see one of those, which would you see? Well, if you see the stretch and that's it, right? And then you double click on it, you might say, okay, but that's probably not going to happen. It's like a 10% chance. So I don't really think I need to see that. I want to see the target. Where's that like 50-50 shot where it's like, if we achieve it, it's good. And if we don't, it's kind of bad on a 50-50 level. And so most of the organizations I'm working with that are big, not like startup companies where they just can do whatever they want, but big companies, they use the target as the key result. And then they say, oh, by the way, here's the stretch and here's the commit.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really helpful because it sounds like it's discussion opening. It's a discussion opening kind of conversation.
Yes. And that's the value of it, because the OKRs framework, as I define OKRs, I don't consider OKRs as a goal setting framework that you use to set goals, right? That would be like saying, what's a banana? It's something you find in the grocery store, or it's a type of fruit. Okay, true, but it doesn't really tell me that much about a banana. So when I give you the definition of OKRs, I tell you OKRs is a verb, okay? And it's about that conversation. So it's a critical thinking framework in an ongoing discipline in which you're asking a certain set of questions, right, throughout the whole OKR cycle, which is typically a quarter, in order to focus effort and make measurable progress and to work together. And so this whole definition of OKRs really does get into this idea of I'm asking questions. So I know I'm doing OKRs when I'm asking questions. Like you said, it forces that, is this really a commit? Is this really the? So by forcing the right questions, you're going to be able to do OKRs better. And I mean, I guess I've already told you a little bit about why my colleagues might disagree with me. And, there's the John Doerr approach, which I think John Doerr probably disagrees with me, although I haven't confronted with him on it. But most of my colleagues would say that scoring system seems so complicated and it takes too much time. And I hear you. My clients think that at first when I present it to them as well. However, once you do it, and it only takes you like an hour, you go through this exercise, you start writing your OKRs. 99% of the time, once you do it, you never look back. In other words, there's a little bit of a barrier to entry. But if you join me on this process, okay, people, if you're listening to me and you don't believe, I'm trying to turn you into a believer. It really is something that every one of my clients loves.
Thank you so much. So we're just before we get into our last three questions, I'm going to ask the people who are with us today, what is a takeaway you have in terms of your thinking about goal setting, thinking about your key results, what you want to achieve? What's a takeaway that you have after this conversation with Ben? And we'll read those off later.
Sure.
Let us know your takeaways. Ben, third to last question. For people who would like to know, what is the summary of your thinking on this? What is it that you believe? And if people agree with you, what are the actions that they should take?
So what I believe is that OKRs is a critical thinking framework, meaning that it's about asking a certain set of questions. And I also believe that you want to have a standard approach so that every key result is written as an aspirational key result. That said, I don't want to tell you to just write the key results as aspirational. I need you to also specify the commit level of progress so that we can have some level of accountability. Like, hey, well, we didn't achieve that, and so that's bad, right? Whereas if you only write it as aspirational, it's just not going to, you're going to say, well, we didn't achieve that. Why? Because it was aspirational. So I'm really going to force you when you're doing OKRs to really think about what is that aspirational level, what is that commit level, and what's that target level, somewhere in between, which may not be linear. As I mentioned in the series example, it was like 18 million, 20 million, 25 million. It doesn't have to be that the commit and the stretch form a bound and you just say, oh, I don't know, let's just pick a target right in the middle. You want to really have that conversation. So this is going to force alignment to manage expectations around right from the start when you're writing down the key result at the beginning on how we're going to score that key result.
Thank you.
That's it.
What is a thought that you would like to leave our viewers with?
Well, I guess the thought I want to leave you with is I really want you to, if you do OKRs, okay, I want you to really take the approach of OKRs is a verb, and it's about asking a set of questions. And so whether or not you're doing OKRs, at your individual person level or for your individual team, even if you're not doing OKRs at that level, for example, maybe you're only doing OKRs at, like, let's say the company level and maybe some business unit level, and you're working within a team that you might not say, oh, that's my OKR. That's okay. You can still do OKRs because OKRs is a verb, meaning that you will ask the questions like, why is that objective important? Or how will we know we've achieved that objective? Or what is the intended outcome of John Doerr producing the demo, right? How will we know the demo makes an impact? All of those questions that you're asking in that example there suggest that you're doing OKRs. And so actually, to take this a step further, let me challenge anybody that's listening to this with this interview between me and Seni on OKRs to say, hey, even if you're not doing OKRs, okay, let's go into that audience as well and say, I actually would challenge you to ask these certain OKR style questions because I believe that you will find that they're incredibly valuable to the work that you approach. And whether it be annual goals or weekly goals or quarterly goals or whatever, your individual goals or your team's goals or the company's goals, I really don't even care. I think you can apply this set of questions to that. And I challenge you to do that. And if you find value, of course, let me know, because I would love to talk to you. I'm always looking to find examples of individuals who have, used OKRs, even, the OKRs framework, even though their organization may not formally be adopting OKRs, but, you've used the OKRs framework to drive your organization forward. That's a really cool thing that happened with several of my quote clients as well. Even though they're not necessarily technically my clients, they're finding value with the OKRs framework in their organization.
So basically ask the questions, figure out what that discussion is between commit and target and aspiration, but keep asking those questions throughout the quarter, at the beginning and throughout the quarter.
Yes. So most people that do OKRs really only answer that question either in the middle or at the end, perhaps both. But they fail to define sort of a retrospective, proactively of, well, what will the end of the quarter look like if it's a commit? What will the end of the quarter look like if it's a stretch? Let's align on that from the start. And I highly recommend you give that a shot.
Nice. And last question.
Sure.
If you were to snap your fingers and almost everyone in the world were to take some action, what would you want that action to be?
Well, I would love for them to do a reflection exercise, which is the left-hand column, right-hand column exercise. And you can find this in the 5th Discipline Field Book if you happen to have that on hand. And this was something developed, I think I want to say by Chris Argyris at Harvard, believe it or not. But it was a reflection exercise where in any conversation, and this can be a coaching conversation, this can be an OKRs discussion. I use it for OKRs, but you could use it for anything. You simply take a piece of paper, boom, line down the middle. Here's what happened in terms of a conversation, right? You're going to transcribe that conversation in the right-hand column. Here's what was said. And in the left-hand column, you're going to reflect on, here were my thoughts. This is what I was thinking, but didn't say. And if you do that in a particular moment, either at work where you felt like you had a breakthrough, or maybe at work where you felt like you got completely stuck and you walked out of a meeting and there was no progress and it was all emotional and the energy was bad and all that. If you do this reflection, I almost can guarantee you, I mean, from my own personal experience, I can say, boom, once you finish that reflection, there's going to be some kind of an insight that you get, a key takeaway, if you will, that is actionable, and you're going to make the world a better place. So it's a deep thought, if you will, but I'm saying through critical reflection on our own behavior and our own interactions with other people, take this little left-hand column, right-hand column exercise. And I bet you if we all did that, if I could just snap my fingers and everybody did that, like within a day or two, the world would just be a better place.
What's one of the things that you have gotten out of doing this? What's one of those insights that you say you definitely get?
One of the insights I got was I went through a big insecurity of myself as an OKRs coach, because I was coaching this one team where the VP of engineering says to me, my goal is to improve our sales. And I'm scratching my head going like, oh my God, this VP of engineering, he's not in sales. How's that going to work? Anyway, by the end of the conversation, we ended up with a key result that the VP of engineering felt was perfect. It got them talking to the VP of sales. They like lived happily ever after. They did this thing called finding out the technical pass rate. I won't go into all the details, but what I'll tell you is what I learned from this was that by sticking to basic questions, even when I don't know what in the world this guy's talking about, and even when I'm like having all these thoughts in my mind of like, oh my God, like what is this guy thinking? He's not even on the sales team. How is this going to work? I had a lot of anxiety about this, but I stuck to the basic questions, right? How will we know that the engineering team has created the sales team? Can you think of a time in the past when the engineering team helped the sales team? And he would say things like, well, we have to help with a major project. Well, can you give me an example between a major project and a minor project? I was just trying to ask these basic questions, sticking to the OKRs framework, and I found that the outcome was a success. So for me, it gave me the confidence I needed in order to continue as an OKRs coach. Because what happens is a lot of times in these conversations, it feels like you're in a maze and you're just bumping your head up against the wall. Boom, boom, you're in the dark, and you think that there's some gold nugget that's going to be glowing in there, like an Indiana Jones movie. At some point, you're going to get to that place. But you need to have a lot of faith in order to do this OKRs coaching work. So I would say that general thing of, I stuck to my pattern of asking these questions, even though I didn't know what I was doing, then I saw that could work. And I wasn't sure exactly how that happened until I did my reflection.
That's super helpful. And it's something that we in coaching think about a lot. How can we ask just the question, but not try to get on the side of finding the solution, where we only know what we know, which is the question asking. That's awesome that it came out from that.
Yeah. Have you seen that left-hand column, right-hand column exercise?
I have not. No, thank you.
So that you could be my first victim.
I'll text you. That sounds good.
Okay.
Ben, thank you so much. Thanks for taking us down the walkway of OKRs and giving us even more opening into the light of how we can use them a little more granularly when we start to use them. Thank you.
It was a lot of fun. Thanks, Anya.
Thank you so much. Delightful to have you on. All the best, everyone. See you later this week.